What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today I am a very excited boy. Because you see, for the very first time ever, I get to exclusively reveal a card from the Final Fantasy trading card game. And I know that I've not done as many videos on this as I would like lately, but don't worry, plenty more are coming. We good. The lovely Tim Schilder over at Square Enix has been like, hey, you want to reveal a card, Wassy? And I was like, yeah, I really do. So might I introduce you to Onion Knight 3, a fire forward from Opus 10. Now, first things first, straight off the bat, we do need to mention that for those of you that have been following spoiler season, this will look extremely similar to a card that we looked at, I believe it was revealed on the Japanese stream early yesterday morning. And it is extremely similar. One could in fact say that it is in fact the same card, except it is a fire forward rather than a wind forward. And I had a brief moment of panic when I saw it revealed on the Japanese stream, going, hang on a second, isn't that the card I'm revealing? I should mention at this stage I'm red-green colorblind. I'm not good at telling red and green apart. Luckily, the Final Fantasy cards have their little element symbols, which is why, as much as I adore the art on the full art cards, I do sometimes struggle just a little bit. Now, the good news is that this is absolutely the kind of card where we may actually want multiple different elements of it. So to have a quick look at the card then, it is a 1-cost forward, which is very cheap. And it has 2,000 power, which is meh. I mean, look, it's a 1-cost 4. What are you expecting? And it is a standard unit, which means you're not limited to only having one of the name on the board, which is nice. And it reads, if you control 4 or more backups of different elements, Onion Knight gains plus 6,000 power. So alright, 1 cost 2,000 power, meh. 1 cost 8,000 power. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is quite an awful lot better. It's a little bit redonk. 1 cost 8,000 power, yes. Now to be fair, 1 cost 8,000 power is not a record. Leon back in Opus 6 was a 1 cost 8,000 power forward. However, when it entered the field, your opponent gained control of it, and when a category 2 character of your opponent enters the field, you gain control of Leon. So yes, you can get that much power on a 1 cost, but by the same token, I think it's fair to say, fairly significant downside. Of course, there is actually a 1 cost 9,000 power. That is the Barnabas from Opus 5. At the beginning of your main phase, if you don't control card named Lugai, Dull Barnabas. And when card named Lugai enters your field, activate Barnabas. So again, we can do slightly better as a 1 cost, but not without significant downsides. Now to go back to Onion Knight 3, obviously, this is not without the downside. It is a 1 cost 2,000 power character, but it gets boosted up to 8,000 power if you've got 4 or more backups of different elements. How likely is that to happen? Now, as a side note here, when the wind version got spoiled yesterday, I did see a bunch of discussion about Shantoto, and I can tell you, well, I can't tell you for definite, right? I'm not an official rules person making official rulings for the Final Fantasy trading card game, but I would be absolutely bowled over stunned if Shantoto actually worked with this. Now, we're talking, of course, about the Shantoto from Opus 1 that is a backup that reads, if Shantoto is on the field, it gains elements of fire, ice, wind, earth, lightning, and water. The thing is, Onion Knight 3 does not say if you control backups with 4 different elements, in which case Shantoto would work nicely. It says if you control 4 or more backups of different elements, so Shantoto would come in here as one of them, but unfortunately would not be able to just pay it. Now, if you could have Shantoto out and Onion Knight 3 would all of a sudden be a 1 cost 8,000 power standard units so you could play multiples, then I would be all in favour and it would be wonderful. But unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, that is not exactly where we are. Now, we get to the question of how likely is it, how reasonable is it to expect that we can have 4 or more backups of different elements? I mean, if we look at the European Championship, one of Nicholas's decks of which he got second place was a mono fire deck. But the problem is we had all fire backups except for Fusoya, who came in as a light backup. Well, now we're only talking about 2 different types, and that's a slight problem. Still in the European Championships, one of the third place decks, played by Evan, was an ice fire deck, which again had a couple of ice backups like the Emperor, but unfortunately it was just ice and fire. We only had 2 different typings. Now, I've mentioned Shantoto, and a bunch of people are happy to chuck Shantoto into a deck, and it's very expensive. It's a 7 cost, but it's also a phenomenal card, so I could certainly see an argument for popping that into one of these decks as well. And then all of a sudden, alright, now you're rocking 3 different types? And maybe you can get away with, say, playing the fire and ice version, and then maybe put in a light backup like Fusoya, and then popping in a Shantoto. But the problem is, if people were happy to do stuff like that, there is an incredibly strong argument that they already would be. If people are currently playing mono or dual element decks, maybe chucking in the occasional light, darkness, Shantoto, etc., it's quite hard to imagine that they're going to all of a sudden be popping to 4 different types of backups. So maybe this isn't the kind of thing that can fit straight into fire decks. And that's a little bit upsetting because at the moment, those 2 fire decks I mentioned, they have no 1-cost forwards between them. But they are playing stuff like Firion from Opus 7, which is, well, it's dependent on how many forwards you've got out. When you play it, you deal 2,000 damage for each forward you control, up to 3 forwards. Sneak X Burst. So the more forwards you've got, the more you're going to do. And if you've got a bunch of 1-cost forwards, that means you're going to have more forwards out early. That could very much help you out. So maybe this becomes more of a thing to play in rainbow decks. But the problem is, I'm sitting here looking at the results of recent tournaments. I'm looking at the European Championships that just happened. I'm looking at the French National. I'm looking at the Benelux National. I'm looking at the Italian National. And we don't see a lot of rainbow decks being represented. So then we get to the question, well, hang on a second, could this lead to rainbow decks? And that's where we come back to the Wind Onion Knight, the one that was shown on stream yesterday. And then, of course, we need to ask the question, well, hang on a second. We've got the Fire Onion Knight, we got the Wind Onion Knight. Could we have a whole bunch of different Onion Knights from different elements, maybe even one for each element? And then maybe we end up with a true rainbow deck. And you play a bunch of cheap backups, and you play a bunch of these Onion Knights and other cheap forwards, and you end up with a very cheap rainbow deck. But instead of having the usual low power forwards you would expect in a very cheap deck, you're actually sitting there rocking 8,000 power. Now, of course, one of the reasons rainbow decks aren't more popular is because of the inherent inconsistency. You need to be paying with the right kind of CP to play all of your characters, and the more different types of elements you play, the more likely it is that you're going to have some cards that can generate CP, but not the right CP, so you're not actually being able to play the characters you want, and then you're back in the inherent inconsistency of a rainbow deck. Maybe it will never work, but it certainly makes me a little bit happy that the idea is there that it could. And certainly this seems like, would they really just do fire and wind? Seems like the kind of thing they do a little bit more of. Will it fit straight into existing decks we've got at the moment? Maybe it will. Maybe a few very good deck builders are going to show us the way as to how we'll fit it in. But the problem is you end up shoehorning in backups other than the ones you'd normally play just to get the benefit of this, which there's a very good chance that won't work. Could we end up with an Onion Knight focused rainbow deck? Challenge accepted, frankly. Challenge accepted. Huge thank you to Tim and the people over at Square Enix for letting me do the spoiler. I am delighted. Hopefully, I've not done it a massive disservice. I would, however, be delighted to know what you think about this, because I've been poring over this card and I've had no one to talk to about it. So I would very much like to hear your opinion. So go nuts in the comment section. But please do remember to be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and follow me on Twitter at @TheWassy, where we talk about Final Fantasy and whatever other games take my fancy. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would you? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching Wassy Plays.